Dr. Vashne, talking about India's role in biodiversity conservation, we know that we are a biodiversity hotspot in the world. We are home to about a tenth of the world's known plant and animal species. But how do you assess the role India has played so far in contributing towards this matter?
See, India has always been very, very conscious of the importance of biodiversity. If we take our ancient epics, right from there, and if you see even day-to-day life of an average Indian here, we worship trees, we worship flowers, we worship everything. We worship forests and we worship. So biodiversity and its protection and its importance is really part of the culture. But somehow, because of the developmental agenda of the kind that we are at the present pursuing, and pursuing with little haste, that the biodiversity values have been diluted or they are getting sidetracked. And that is a reason that all over again we have to really relearn the importance of biodiversity. I will say that first we must understand that why biodiversity is important to us.
Right.
Is it simply a cliche or is it really very vital? And if it is vital, then we must do. And are we doing enough? That is a question. Or it is just a cliche, then I think we should not worry about it.
Also, why is it that we are hearing about it only for the last couple of decades?
Right. And I think to cut the story short, I will say that we depend on biodiversity. At the time, every moment that we are dependent on biodiversity. For example, this cleaning of the air that we breathe everywhere. Wherever we go, we carry our water, we carry our clothing, but we never carry our air. And everywhere we are sure that we will get a clean air. Now this cleaning is done by the activity of the entire group of green plants, which are of various form, right from a single cell to the giant trees like sequoia. And they are really performing this task of cleaning the air, taking the bad air that we give out from our nose and to give us pure oxygen or improving. So the atmosphere is maintained by this activity. Now,
made earlier in the program, the fact that we are confined mostly on the terrestrial realm when we talk about our conservation efforts, we completely overlook the marine life, the ocean life, so to say. How significant is it for us to understand the importance of marine life?
See, the marine life is very important because even if you see not from biodiversity but in climate change perspective also, all the studies says the most affected due to climate change would be the people in the coast and the marine thing, because the first thing impact would be rising sea level.
Right.
So that is the most important thing. And you know, the thing that we're more focused on forests because actually we really don't know what is inside the sea, because it's a lot of biodiversity which scientists are still discovering it and finding it. Okay, this is the species which still exists. Okay, there is a new species we have found.
Right.
But yeah, we don't have any policies per se for preserving of marine biodiversity, because I think the policies and the focus whatever we have is limited to the forest and our tigers and our elephants and the big mammals and the birds. But yeah, that is true that the marine biodiversity is being sidelined and being overshadowed by these big mammals and other things. And in fact, I would like to mention that in the National Board for Wildlife meeting also, there was a mention of preserving those small species, not exactly the marine, but those small species which are actually important, which are critically endangered, but they are being sidelined. So the focus should be equal on all species, because this ecosystem cannot survive if one species is protected and other is neglected.
Right.
Because everything is symbiotic. So we have to focus on preserving, taking everything together.
Right.
So yeah, that is true that we don't know about
the fact that our oceans are also worthy of conservation.
Exactly. See, there is when we come about awareness, we really don't know. Even if you go to a school or a college, people don't know what is environment, what is biodiversity. If you per se, they'll know, okay, this is environment. But when you go ask for those minor details, that why is it important for them, why they need to protect it, how is it that they are surviving because the biodiversity and the climate survives, and how both are like it's a two-way process where you survive and biodiversity survives.
Right.
But we have no awareness programs, people don't know. So the thing is that people in the cities, especially in the schools, a child living in a village do understand, because he goes to forest, he sees it, he lives there. But students in schools and colleges in the cities have certain duties to Mother Earth. and that is when we should know how to protect it. So that is very important.
So, Dr. Vashnan, is that a key challenge that you see ahead, the lack of knowledge about the significance of biodiversity?
I think this is an important aspect that we have to really ingrain the importance of biodiversity into our people. And I think education is one such vehicle through which it can be done. For example, today engineer, a graduate in engineering, and he's responsible for industrial development. And this industrial development becomes head-on with the biodiversity issues, because after all, land is involved, the area is involved, either the pollution or the noise. And therefore, it is important that it is a part of the curriculum of all engineering students. It's a part of the curriculum of all economics students. Unless that is going to happen, which means that there is going to be altogether out-of-box thinking in terms of that what kind of capsule of knowledge is to be provided in order to achieve this, because this money is allocated. Maybe it is going to be spent also, like we have spent so much money on Ganga cleaning without getting much. So I think it is time that we must understand that what are the other basic requirements to really see that such money and effort and enthusiasm which is generated by conferences like as we have had in Hyderabad can be harnessed and the targeted achievement can be made. And for that we have to really condition ourselves in a big way, which means the paradigm shift is required both in terms of our developmental priorities, and it is important that we have to mainstreaming biodiversity in our every action plan and processes. And unless that really happens, I am not sure that the kind of objective that we have for preserving biodiversity for posterity will be achieved very easily.
But Dr. Vashnan, don't you think that it's also part of the problem that biodiversity is such a vast term, it's all encompassing and it's immeasurable? Don't you think that also adds to the problem?
It does add to the problem. It is here that I have to say that more studies are required so that it becomes even more visible. Their joint activity is a joint enterprise, and this enterprise is far more complex and elaborate than any human-made enterprise anywhere on the globe. So I think it is this, the magnanimity of this, the largeness of this must really attract our attention, and we must emphasize that. But the biodiversity is never really preached that way. It has been already told that there is a tree and there is a cow and this is the animal and this is a camel. Now that is important. These are the elements, but the elements are only a small jigsaw puzzle, but all of them put together creates magic on this earth, and that magic is that we have the clean water, clean air, fertile soil, which really support our harvest and so on, and throws up all kinds of job opportunities and provides job to the people. And that is what the need of the hour. So if we have a system which has the potential of providing the livelihood, here is a system which maintains and keeps the integrity of the air, water and soil, then I think it is our duty to really respect. And therefore it is said Mother Earth everywhere, in every language, in every country, because it is this which provides supports and really provides the field for us, for our intellectual development, for our academic development, for our progress.
Right, Richard, that's an important point. The fact that biodiversity conservation also helps conserve livelihoods in our country. How is that relevant to us?
See, that's very important, because still a half, like 70-80% like of our population lives in villages where they live in a cooperation near forests or near, and they're dependent more like for forest produce, for other things, for firewood, for other things. They're totally dependent on forests, and it's a symbiotic thing. It's not that they exploit forests, but they live in very much in harmony from years and years and years. So it's a source of livelihood for them. So that is why there's a lot of protest comes in when their forest land is being taken, because it affects their livelihood.
Right.
The same was in the case of protection of tigers, because it was now government has realized that it's important to have the local people because they can effort, they can actually act as an important person to protect the tigers, because they know the area, they're dependent on the forest nearby, they know each and every area.
They can do much better than a forest guard.
So it's a livelihood for them, because they collect forest produce and everything, and in return they save the tigers.
Can only be ensured when we have got an intact watershed, and this intact watershed can only be envisaged when they are properly clothed with trees and bushes and plants. So soil conservation, it is important not because that it will harness water for us and will provide more amount of water, prevent flood, but at the same time it will prevent siltation of our expensive structures in which we have a great stake, because they provide water, they provide electricity, and they really contain the flood. So I think from all perspective, whatever perspective we take, Richa has mentioned that just about forests. I will say that I will go a step further. I will say that even agriculture is again dependent upon a particular element of the biodiversity. So not only that people in the forest, but people who are engaged in agriculture, who are doing cotton cultivation, who are doing sugarcane cultivation, different varieties, even those who are having honey or the beekeeping. I think there's enormous amount of diversity and activity woven around the biodiversity, which really provides livelihood of all varieties and the kinds. For example, if the cotton is there, then the cotton mill can be envisaged, the ginning can be possible, the transportation comes in picture. So I think all people who are even not directly involved are absolutely indirectly dependent on one thing or the other on biodiversity.
Right, Dr. Varshney, we'll talk about agro-biodiversity in greater detail and the threats faced by the sector when we return from this short break. Stay with us for the final segment of the show.
Today is a product of millions of years of evolution. Then this biodiversity have came into being, and therefore to destroy it for a product which really take that much time to be created, I think we have to think again. So this is another aspect which I wanted to emphasize. Now the question is that you are saying about GM. So GM crops are de novo crops. They are not really part of that evolutionary system by which they are well adjusted to the rest of the biodiversity. And so this is one issue. But more than that, when you have an alien of this kind, you never know that how it is going to behave or what impact it will have on other organisms. So if it gets mixed up, and then final product, because of the breeding or interbreeding, I should say, or crossbreeding, what final product will arise out of it, nobody has an idea, and no experiments have been done. So the question is that most of these studies have been done in isolated cases of greenhouses or in a very well protected environment, and therefore in nature,
commitment towards conserving biodiversity and its own economic needs, its own vast population to feed.
See, the thing is that the most important thing for us is to feed our people.
Right.
Because we're still a developing country. We don't have those infrastructure and things. We still, 40% of our population has not seen the light. They still live on kerosene lamp, and still there are so many people, millions of them, who sleep at night without food, because we have to meet those demands. We have to do our development, we have to build our infrastructure, and on side by side, we cannot do a growth like the Western countries have done. Most of the Western countries have done away with their biodiversity. They have actually done, they just have limited forests, and they don't have the species, the kind of species exist in India and other neighboring South Asian countries. So actually that is the most important thing, that we have to include, like we have to be very cautious, we have to walk like with scientific things and everything, studies to support that. How can we include all these things, because those are very important. We cannot go on a development process like the Western world where you just kill your biodiversity and you achieve a growth and a infrastructure, but we have to include that, and for that we have to be really cautious, and we have to include all the concerns and work together with biodiversity and development hand in hand. It is a difficult thing, there's a lot of opposition coming, but there are still people who exist, that who are concerned about the biodiversity, And I think that is the best way. You cannot totally neglect one on the cost of other.
Okay.
You cannot say no development, only protection of biodiversity. That cannot be the thing. Or only biodiversity and no development. That cannot be the thing.
Okay,
so
a middle path has to be found.
A middle path, yeah.
Right, Dr. Varshney.
I'm not quite sure you are really asking a right type of question in this case. The first point is that we have established, or we now see that, and the conference is further established that, or at least strengthened, that biodiversity is a international meetings. So I will say that there is no confrontation, but what is required is that new ways and new methods and new strategies, innovative ways are required to harmonize the two, so that both of them survive and achieve the objectives.
So you're saying sustainability and economic growth can go hand in hand?
It can. In fact, without biodiversity and environmental conservation and preservation, sustainable growth cannot be envisaged for long. It is an important criteria that it has to have the conditions safe in order to grow. For example, now the global warming is such which is upsetting the apple cart. So unless we have the protection of the air, unless we have the protection of the organism which maintain the air's right quality, it is not possible to foresee for a long time any amount of industrial development. So I think it is important that the biodiversity elements have to be so protected along with the industrial growth, and therefore a new thinking has to come, a new way of looking at things, because it cannot continue the old model that we have pursued, which is world over has destroyed biodiversity. And one thing more, that our stakes in biodiversity are much higher than the industrialized countries, because their total global distribution of biodiversity is such that those who are industrialized have very little biodiversity to begin with. What they have destroyed is another thing, but even to begin with, they have on their lands much less biodiversity as compared to the developing countries, and in which India is fortunate enough. We have 2% of the land area.
To deal with it, Richa, which can perhaps help in better implementation of our efforts in a time-bound manner?
Yeah, exactly. As of now, when we talk about the GM crops, we don't have law to regulate it.
Right.
And recently this patenting thing also, those laws have also been very recent. So yeah, we need laws to protect our biodiversity too, and we have to be really aggressive on that we protect our biodiversity.
And we have to do our biodiversity mapping also, Doctor.
Absolutely, we have to do a mapping and we have to really learn about biodiversity more and more, and also its virtues by doing more research and more exploiting their values, so that not only the Indians get benefited from it, but also the entire population of the other countries and the globe gets benefited. There are lots of products which can come from biodiversity which are still waiting to be discovered.
Right. So clearly, Richa, India needs to do a lot more, and it can do a lot more. In fact, our forest cover is shrinking and authorities are saying they want to increase it by 10%. How optimistic are you about this particular goal?
What I feel is that it's not just the government policies which work, it's the people. We all have to work together to protect our biodiversity.
Right.
And people have been doing it. Where the land was being chopped off by some industries, they did come and opposed it. They fought for it.
Right.
So this is a model where the government and people should join together and protect the
and
forest.
that can only happen through proper awareness. Well, exactly. I have to leave it at that. That's all we had time for. We'd like to thank both our guests for coming to our studios, Richa Sharma, Professor Varshney. It was a pleasure having you both here. That's it for now in this edition of Insight. Many thanks for watching. Goodbye.